What happens when hatred turns into an act of unexpected mercy? This story follows Diem, who collapses in the night only to be saved by the last person she would imagine, Toan's mother, a woman who had always despised her. Though Madame Lan once tried to tear them apart, she now secretly cares for Diem, even braving the storm to buy her medicine. Diem awakens to unanswered questions, unaware of the hidden hand that protected her. Is this the beginning of acceptance or just fleeting compassion? Subscribe now to follow this moving tale of love, pride, and unspoken bonds. The silence of the night was heavy, broken only by the faint sound of rain tapping against the window panes. On the cold marble floor of the spacious living room, Diem's fragile body lay motionless, her breath shallow, her face pale, as if all the warmth had drained away. The world around her blurred into nothingness, and the soft glow of the chandelier above could not chase away the darkness closing in on her senses. It was at that moment, when she seemed most alone and most vulnerable, that an unexpected figure appeared at the threshold, Madame Lan, Toan's mother. For years, Madame Lan had harbored a deep resentment toward Diem. She had never accepted the idea of her son, the proud CEO Toan, binding his future to a woman she deemed unworthy. Every word she spoke to Diem had once been sharp, every glance filled with disapproval, as though she could cut the bond between them with her disdain alone. She had fought in silence and in whispers, arranging situations, planting doubts, hoping that time would tear them apart. Diem, to her eyes, was an intruder, someone who dared to step into a world where she did not belong. And yet, as Madame Lan's gaze fell upon Diem now, so still, so fragile, something inside her shifted. The old flames of anger and bitterness flickered, threatened by the sudden surge of instinct only a mother could understand. Though Diem was not her daughter, though she had spent years denying her place in the family, the sight of the young woman collapsing helplessly struck a chord that Madame Lan could not ignore. Her steps, hesitant at first, grew urgent as she crossed the room. The sharpness in her eyes melted into worry, and with trembling hands she bent down to lift Diem from the unforgiving floor. The weight of the girl in her arms startled her. How light she was, too light, as though every burden of the world had pressed her thin. Madame Lan felt a pang in her chest, an unfamiliar ache that softened her iron heart. Memories of her own struggles, of the nights when she herself had fought alone against despair, rose unbidden to the surface. She had always believed that Diem was a weakness, a distraction that would tether Toan to a fate less grand than he deserved. But in this moment, as she carefully brushed a strand of hair from Diem's damp forehead, she saw not a threat, not a rival for her son's affection, but a woman, exhausted, vulnerable, and desperately in need of care. Her mind whispered to turn away, to let Diem bear the weight of her own choices. After all, hadn't she wanted this? Hadn't she defied the family's expectations, clung stubbornly to Toan despite every warning? Yet her body betrayed her resolve. Her arms held Diem closer. Her voice, though barely above a whisper, murmured soft words that she herself was surprised to hear. "You foolish girl," she breathed, not in anger this time, but in a strange mix of reproach and concern. The chandelier's light spilled over them, illuminating a scene no one else would ever believe. The formidable matriarch, who had long been a wall between her son and his love, now cradling the very woman she had once rejected. And though she told herself this was only a fleeting act of humanity, one she would hide from Toan and from Diem, her heart knew the truth. Something had shifted within her tonight. Something fragile, something unspoken, an awakening that even she could not yet name. Madame Lan lingered for a moment after placing Diem gently on the sofa, her hands hovering as if reluctant to let go. She adjusted the blanket over the young woman's trembling body, the gesture so tender it startled even herself. For years, she had refused to show such kindness, convinced that to soften even once would mean surrendering her authority as the matriarch of the family. And yet, here she was, wiping away a bead of cold sweat from Diem's brow, her fingers betraying the battle in her heart. The night outside grew darker, the rain heavier, as though nature itself conspired to cloak her actions in secrecy. She knew she had little time. If Toan were to return and see the scene, his mother bent over the woman she had sworn never to accept, there would be questions, accusations, and perhaps wounds that could never be healed. So Madame Lan pulled away, straightening her back, reclaiming that air of dignity she wore like armor. Still, her eyes kept drifting back to Diem's pale face, her lips pressing together as she fought the storm inside her. When the young woman let out a faint whimper, her body shivering beneath the blanket, Madame Lan's resolve fractured again. She could not stand by and watch her suffer. With hurried steps, she retrieved her handbag and slipped quietly out of the house. The night air was sharp and damp, chilling her bones as she pulled her coat tighter. Each step along the dimly lit street echoed louder in her mind, a drumbeat of conflict. What was she doing? Why was she, who had sworn never to lift a finger for this girl, now braving the storm just to fetch medicine for her? At the 24-hour pharmacy, Madame Lan found herself staring at rolls of bottles and boxes, their labels blurring through the fog in her eyes. It had been years since she had stood in such a place, years since she had bought anything as simple as fever medicine. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the box, the weight of it far heavier than it should have been. She lingered at the counter, half tempted to leave it behind, to tell herself this act of compassion was weakness, not necessity. But when the pharmacist asked if it was for her daughter, Madame Lan faltered. She nearly shook her head, nearly declared it was for no one of consequence. Yet, for reasons she could not name, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "for my daughter." The word felt strange on her tongue, but it carried a warmth she could not deny. By the time she returned, the house was steeped in silence. She moved like a shadow, careful not to wake anyone, careful not to betray her presence. Placing the medicine on the nightstand beside Diem, she poured a glass of warm water and set it down, her movements precise and deliberate, as though she could erase all evidence of her intrusion. Then she stood back, watching Diem's chest rise and fall in shallow rhythm, a fragile proof of life that stirred something raw within her. Diem would never know. She would never know who had carried her from the floor, who had soothed her with the blanket, who had braved the storm to buy her medicine. When she awoke, she would see only the pills and the water, faceless gifts from an invisible hand. And perhaps that was for the best. Madame Lan could not yet face the truth of her actions, could not yet allow either Diem or her son to glimpse the vulnerability she had hidden all these years. Still, as she stood at the door, her hand resting lightly on the frame, her gaze lingered one last time on the girl she had once called unworthy. For the first time, the hatred she carried felt hollow, fragile, like glass threatening to crack under the weight of something far stronger. She turned away before the thought could settle, vanishing into the silence of the night, leaving only questions in her wake. Was this mercy, pity, or the first fragile thread of acceptance weaving its way into her heart? The first rays of dawn slipped quietly through the curtains, washing the room in a tender glow of pale gold. Diem stirred beneath the blanket, her lashes fluttering as though she were caught between dreams and reality. Her body still felt weak, but there was a warmth by her side, a small glass of water, half filled, and a box of medicine resting neatly beside it. She frowned, confusion shadowing her delicate features. Who had placed these here? Who had watched over her in the silence of the night? The last memory she had was of collapsing on the cold floor, her world tilting into darkness. Everything else was a blur. She sat up slowly, her head heavy, her heart heavier still. The water was still warm, as though it had been prepared with care only moments before. Diem picked it up with trembling fingers, staring at the condensation on the glass. The gesture felt intimate, deliberate. Someone had worried for her. Someone had refused to let her slip away in the night. And yet no name came to her lips, no face to her mind. A mystery lingered, haunting her like a secret she was not meant to uncover. As she swallowed the medicine, a strange emotion rose within her. Gratitude tangled with unease. She had been saved, but by whom? Toan, perhaps? But she knew his footsteps, his presence. He would never have left without staying by her side. No, this care had been cloaked in silence, invisible, almost hidden on purpose. She touched the blanket drawn tightly around her, noticing the way it had been tucked in with precision, the way a mother might tend to a child. The thought made her chest ache. Could it be? But the possibility was so impossible that she pushed it away, unwilling to give shape to such a fragile hope. Meanwhile, in another corner of the vast house, Madame Lan sat alone in her room, her back straight against the carved wooden chair, her eyes fixed on nothing. Her hands rested on her lap, but they would not stop trembling. The night's events replayed endlessly in her mind. The weight of Diem in her arms, the whispered words she had let slip, the act of buying medicine in a storm. All of it felt like a betrayal of the wall she had so carefully built around her heart. For years, she had sworn she would never accept Diem, never bend her will to the desires of her son. She had worn her disapproval like armor, convinced it was her duty to protect Toan's future. And yet one night had undone her resolve. She closed her eyes, her lips pressed tightly together. Was it weakness that had guided her hands, or something else, something buried deeper, something she had long denied? The image of Diem lying helpless on the floor returned again and again, and with it came a pain she could not explain. For the first time, she had seen the young woman not as an enemy, not as a threat, but simply as a soul in need of saving. And in that fleeting moment, the walls around her heart had cracked. But she would not tell Toan. She would not tell Diem. The act would remain her secret, hidden in the folds of the night like a forbidden confession. To reveal it would mean admitting to herself that she was changing, that her heart was softening against her will. And Madame Lan was not ready for that. Not yet. Back in her room, Diem pressed the glass of water against her lips, her eyes moist with unspoken questions. Whoever had saved her had chosen to remain in the shadows, but their presence lingered in every detail, in every gesture of care left behind. A quiet strength settled in her chest. She was not as alone as she thought. Somewhere, unseen, someone had decided her life was worth protecting. And though the truth lay hidden between silence and secrecy, both women carried its weight in their hearts, one with questions, the other with denial. Neither spoke of it, neither dared to. Yet in that unspoken bond, fragile and delicate, was the first thread of acceptance, a thread that might one day weave itself into something far stronger than hatred, stronger even than pride.
Hello, Xin chào tất cả các khán giả của kênh Ly Tu Diem Review. Rất vui vì ngày hôm nay lại gặp được các bạn trong tập phim ngày hôm nay. Trong tập phim ngày hôm nay thì mẹ của Toàn đã âm thầm cứu Diễm và đã âm thầm đi mua thuốc cho Diễm, mà Diễm và Toàn thì không hề hay biết. Có phải hành động này của bà đã ngầm khẳng định là bà đã chấp nhận cho Diễm và Toàn yêu nhau hay không? Hay là chỉ là lương tâm của bà bỗng trở lên tốt đột ngột? Tất cả sẽ được hé lộ vào các tập tiếp theo, sẽ được phát sóng hàng ngày vào lúc 6 giờ sáng giờ Việt Nam trên kênh Ly Tu Diem Review. Các bạn nhớ bấm vào nút đăng ký kênh, có hình quả chuông ở dưới video để nhận được thông báo mới nhất về các tập phim sẽ được phát sóng trên kênh nhé. Cảm ơn các bạn vì đã luôn dành tình cảm cho mình thật nhiều. Xin chào và hẹn gặp lại các bạn vào các tập tiếp theo. Bye bye!